When the warehouse exploded, Duke wasn't looking for praise. He found a child under the rubble and laid his body over him, letting the flames strike him instead. Jack held him afterward and whispered, "Good job, buddy." But the cameras turned to a captain who never stepped into the fire. The applause went to the wrong man. Days later, that same man called Duke broken and threw him away. Months later, under bright lights, Duke lay down again, not from fear, but to warn them of the bomb beneath the stage. The dog they tried to erase saved them all. If loyalty means more to you than applause, subscribe. Some heroes don't need attention, but their stories deserve to be heard. Rain fell on the smoldering warehouse, turning ash into muddy streaks on the ground. Jack Walker stood in the gray drizzle, soaked through his uniform, feeling the cold crawl beneath the fabric. He was 39, broad-shouldered, still carrying the quiet pride of a K-9 officer with years on the street. His hair, dark and messy under his helmet, clung to his forehead. Beside him stood Duke, his partner, an aging German shepherd with brown-black fur and a steady, serious posture. Duke's ears twitched at every shift in the wind, every small sound behind the ruined walls. Jack trusted the dog more than he trusted half the men in uniform. Duke never lied, never bragged, never turned his back. A lieutenant shouted orders behind them, but Jack barely heard. Smoke seeped through the air in long, bitter threads. Somewhere inside that warehouse, a fire hissed, as if the building itself was breathing its last. Jack whispered low to his partner, like confiding in an old friend. "Easy, boy. Not yet." Duke's tail didn't move. He only lowered his head, eager, listening. They stepped forward when the order came, boots cracking glass beneath them, their flashlights swaying over twisted metal and broken crates. Heat still radiated from the concrete like a fever refusing to die. Then Duke froze. His chest stiffened, nostrils flaring sharply. Jack saw the moment instinct took over, the kind of moment a human hesitates, and a dog does not. Duke pulled against his lead, sharp, focused, then tore free and dove into a pocket of collapsed debris. Jack called out, but Duke ignored him. The dog shoved his body under a fallen beam and began digging desperately. A tiny sound answered back. A cough. A child's cough. Jack's blood went cold. He knelt beside Duke, helping, pulling apart the rubble with frantic fingers until a small, soot-covered boy emerged, whimpering, half-conscious. Duke didn't wait. The dog climbed over him, pressing his body protectively against the child, shielding him with his weight, his breath shaking. Jack opened his mouth to call for medics, and the world answered first. A second explosion tore through the warehouse, a deep, roaring blast that punched the air out of Jack's lungs. Heat slammed into his back, shrapnel skittered across concrete. Jack hit the ground, tasting dust and copper. His ears rang with a piercing scream that didn't belong to the wind. When he lifted his head, Duke lay curled over the boy, trembling. Blood trickled from his ears. His breathing came in brief, broken gasps. Jack crawled to him, cradling the shaking animal with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. He whispered into Duke's fur, voice cracking like old wood. "You did good, son. You did good." Nobody clapped. Nobody praised the dog. Fire crews ran past, shouting about protocol, about reports, about blame. But Duke had saved the boy. And in the smoke and the sirens, Jack felt something else rising. Not pride, but a foreboding. Because the moment Duke saved a life was the same moment someone else's reputation was about to burn. A thin gray morning settled over the precinct, quiet as ash after a fire. The hallways smelled faintly of smoke and disinfectant, as though the warehouse blaze had followed them home. Duke returned from his medical check, still wobbly on his paws, his ears wrapped in fresh white bandages that absorbed more silence than sound. The German shepherd moved slower than yesterday, each step careful, like he had learned something painful about the world. Jack walked beside him, uniform wrinkled, boots streaked with soot. He could hear the hum of computers, paper cups hitting trash bins, someone laughing in the break room, yet no one glanced their way. No one asked how the dog was. Duke saved a child, but the building greeted him as if he were only another piece of equipment returning from repair. Jack stayed with him in the kennel room, kneeling near the steel enclosure while Duke lay on his side, breathing in steady, muted huffs. Jack whispered things only a handler would understand. Words of reassurance, half memory, half gratitude. Outside, the morning sun tried to break through the clouds but failed, leaving streaks of dull silver on the tile floor. Footsteps entered the room, heavy, slow, a man used to being listened to. Captain Ron Moss stood in the doorway, 50 years old, broad frame in a structured Navy command coat. His closely trimmed gray hair and clean-shaven face made him seem carved out of old duty and unspoken disappointment. When he spoke, his voice carried a steady weight, the kind that once drew crowds, applause, and cameras. "I remember when Rex pulled that boy from the van," Moss said, eyes lingering not on Jack, but on Duke. "Reporters waited outside my house. People sent letters. They said Rex was incredible, but they said my name." The room felt smaller, as though the walls understood the bitterness clinging to his words. Jack straightened quietly. Moss continued, his tone steady but hollow. "Yesterday, no one asked who handled Duke. They didn't mention you. They only talked about the dog. And that is not how this department works." He stepped closer, hand resting on the cold steel bars of Duke's enclosure. "This team honors men, Walker, not animals. This dog shines too bright, and that cannot stay." Jack felt something settle inside him. Part anger, part sorrow for a man living under the shadow of his own legend. Moss's eyes did not hate Duke. They envied him, because a dog had done what Moss could not, save a life without needing the spotlight. Jack lowered his hand onto Duke's paw, warm and loyal, trusting without knowing politics or pride. In that quiet moment, he understood. Duke wasn't being retired for his injuries. He was being punished for being unforgettable. A drizzle clung to the morning air like a thin veil of pity over the precinct yard. There was no ceremony, no handshakes, no polished boots lined in respect. Just a folding table set outside the rear entrance, damp with mist, and a cheap duffel bag that held Duke's tag, blanket, and a worn toy with frayed threads. The bag looked too small to carry all he had given. Duke stood beside Jack, ears still bandaged, posture steady yet unsure, like a worker called in early, only to learn he no longer had a job. The dog's fur, black and tan with ash, still trapped beneath it, caught droplets of rain that ran down his side like he was being washed clean by something far more honest than the people around him. Jack held the leash loosely, not to restrain, but to stay close. He kept his voice low, steady, almost like prayer. Captain Moss appeared with a clipboard and an expression carved from old pride and fresh insecurity. He wore the same Navy command coat, but something about it seemed smaller today, too tight for a man who had once filled rooms with his presence. His voice carried through the yard, louder than the situation required, as if the whole world needed to hear him speak. "Officer Duke is officially removed from duty," he declared. "His condition is a liability to this team. Keeping him would compromise the reputation of our unit." A few officers shifted their weight. One snorted softly as though agreeing. Another smirked. The drizzle thickened. Jack looked at the faces gathered. Co-workers who had once cheered with him during training. Men who had ruffled Duke's fur for luck before raids. Now they stared down, or away, or with a hint of amusement, as though watching a joke unfold. Duke blinked up at Jack, confused by the sudden change in posture, the absence of familiar warmth from those he had trusted. The dog didn't know what words were, but he knew tone. He understood celebration and betrayal. His head lowered slightly. not in shame, but in bewilderment at the silence where loyalty once lived. Jack signed the paper without hesitation, though his jaw tightened so hard it ached. Moss nodded curtly, waiting for a reaction he would not receive. Jack leaned down, his hand settling gently on Duke's neck, voice barely louder than a breath. "You're not useless," he whispered. "You're being punished for being better than a frightened man." Duke pressed his body closer, as if absorbing the tremor in Jack's voice. Moss cleared his throat, trying to command the moment back into his own narrative. But something had shifted. The rain softened and the yard felt quieter, as though even the weather refused to applaud. No ceremony, no plaque, no gratitude. Only a dog who had given everything, standing with a man who refused to look away. Jack lifted the duffel bag. Duke walked beside him, not disgraced, simply done with a place unworthy of him. Warm afternoon light rested across the gravel driveway of a quiet rural clinic. Jack stepped out of the truck, letting the door close softly instead of slamming. He didn't want Duke to flinch again. The dog followed him slowly, paws dragging just a little, ears wrapped in soft gauze, head lowered but not from pain, only uncertainty. They walked past a wooden sign faded by sun and seasons. Bennett Veterinary Rehabilitation Center. The building was small, white with peeling paint along the trim. Inside, it smelled of cedar shavings, warm fur, and something soothing, like eucalyptus. Jack took a slow breath. He hoped the air alone might heal something in Duke. Dr. Laura Bennett emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on a simple gray apron. She was in her mid-30s, slender, with soft brown hair tied low and a pair of glasses that slid slightly down her nose. Her voice was gentle, unhurried, like someone who understood wounds that didn't bleed. She crouched beside Duke, letting him come to her instead of reaching first. Duke sniffed her wrist, unsure, but didn't back away. She didn't smile too brightly or speak too loudly. She simply welcomed him with patience. "Good boy," she whispered, almost like a secret meant only for him. After tests in a quiet room padded to soften echoes, Laura returned with simple words, not dramatic ones. "He isn't deaf," she said, her tone careful, respectful. "His hearing is intact. He's responding to anxiety, not injury." Jack frowned slightly, not in anger, but in puzzlement. "So why won't he react to commands?" Laura rested one hand on Duke's back. The dog was tense, yet leaning slightly toward her warmth. "Because he's overwhelmed by loud memories," she said. "He's not afraid of danger. He's afraid of the sound that came after he saved someone. That's different." She paused, letting Jack absorb it. Then she added quietly, "His sense of smell. It's even sharper now. Dogs who survive explosions often develop heightened detection instincts. Trauma changed him, but it didn't break him." Jack looked at Duke, seeing him not as a wounded soldier, but as someone still learning to stand again. Duke nudged his arm timidly, as if asking if he was still wanted. Laura spoke one last time, softly, like a truth she had waited to share. "He didn't lose ability. He lost trust, like a soldier who saved his comrades, yet trembles at the next gunshot." Jack rested his hand on Duke's chest, feeling the heartbeat that had carried so much courage. "Then I'll trust him," he said, "until he trusts himself again." Duke leaned into him, not out of fear, out of relief. Night training smelled of dew, old concrete, and distant pine. Jack chose darkness for Duke's healing. It was quieter than daylight, free from patrol chatter, sirens, and uniforms pretending to care. The backyard behind his small house became a training ground. Just a stretch of damp grass, wooden crates, and a speaker wired to an old laptop. Duke walked beside him, cautious, tail low, but eyes willing. 3 months had already passed since the explosion, yet some memories still shook beneath his fur, like an aftershock. Jack played a recording of a muffled blast, no louder than a slammed cabinet. Duke trembled but didn't run. Jack didn't reward him with food first. He rewarded him with touch, a slow hand on the head, a steady presence that no sound could drown out. As nights drifted into weeks, the volume increased. Duke flinched less each time, learning not to flee from the echo, but to breathe through it. Jack always kept his voice low, deep, patient. He spoke as though training a soldier, not a pet. "Stand your ground, boy," he would murmur, letting Duke lean against his leg when fear crept up from memory. The praise was simple, a pat, a soft word, no cheering, no whistles, just respect. Slowly, Duke began to understand that fear could exist without owning him. It could shake him without steering him. Jack soon added new challenges. They ran drills among broken pallets, shadowy corners, and mimic ruins carved from plywood. He spread small vials of gunpowder along fence posts, buried traces beneath bricks, and hid mock devices inside cosmetic bottles and lotion tubes. Duke sniffed, hesitated, then lowered himself into a perfect alert, belly flat, still as stone, waiting for command. Jack's chest tightened with pride each time. Though he never celebrated loudly, he understood how fragile a returning spirit could be. On one particular night, a loud burst echoed from the speakers, sharp enough to rattle windows. Duke trembled, looked at Jack, and chose not to retreat. Instead, he searched, found the hidden powder, and signaled calm, precise, unbroken. Jack knelt, placing a firm hand around Duke's shoulders as though shielding him from invisible applause. "You saved a child," he whispered, voice weighted with conviction. "Don't let the fear of a failed man take away what you earned." Duke pressed his muzzle into Jack's palm, not seeking comfort, but sharing strength. His breathing steadied. Then came the discovery no officer could ignore. Duke detected explosive residue mixed within perfume oils and makeup creams, substances designed to disguise scent. Such detection was rare, almost unheard of. Jack watched, astonished, as Duke repeated the alert perfectly. The dog was not returning to who he was. He was becoming something new, something no glory-chasing captain could ever claim. Duke didn't just come back. He rose above what tried to break him. Autumn wind tapped against the window like a slow, persistent knock. Jack sat at his kitchen table, coffee cooling in a chipped mug, Duke resting on a blanket nearby. The dog's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, exhausted from late-night drills. 3 months of silent work had hardened his focus. Fear still flickered in him sometimes, but no longer ruled him. Jack stroked the envelope lying before him. Heavy paper, gold trim, too elegant for its purpose. He had requested the department to review Duke's reinstatement. Moss had not answered with words. He had answered with this invitation. Jack sliced the envelope open calmly, though something warm and bitter moved behind his ribs. The card was glossy, dark blue, embossed with the police emblem. A gold title stretched across the front. K9 Unit Showcase, Witness Excellence in Service. Beneath it, in smaller print, a sentence so sharp it almost cut. Learn what it means for a dog to be worthy of duty. Jack read it twice, the ink gleaming under pale morning light. He could almost hear Moss's voice laced between the letters, smug, rehearsed, hungry for applause. Duke lifted his head, ears pricking as though sensing tension without sound. Jack placed the card aside gently, refusing to let anger spill into the air. The dog had learned to stand against echoes. Jack would learn to stand against pride. When Laura stopped by later with a small bag of training scents, her expression softened when she saw the card. She was still in her clinic apron, hair tied back loosely, but her tone held the firmness of someone who understood how power could wound without touching. "He wants you to feel small," she said. "Wants you to walk in there begging." Jack slid the card toward her. She didn't need to read it twice. Duke padded to Jack's side and leaned against his leg quietly, like an answer to a question unspoken. Jack scratched the dog's neck, fingers slow, thoughtful. "I won't beg," he said, voice even. "I'm not going for permission." He looked at Duke, not at the card. "I'm going because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs a place to stand." Laura nodded, understanding without asking more. Pride could be loud, like moss, but truth could walk on 4 calm paws and speak without a single bark. Jack set the invitation in a drawer, not hidden, just resting. Duke settled at his feet, head heavy on his boot, as though promising to stand with him wherever the path led. No fear, no pleading, only patience waiting for the right moment to be seen. They would go, not to seek favor, but to let truth rise on its own. Bright lights glared against polished floors, pretending the night held nothing to fear. The hall buzzed with the kind of excitement only cameras could create. Reporters moved like restless birds, their equipment clicking and blinking beneath banners that celebrated innovation, progress, and the future of K-9 policing. Captain Moss stood center stage, shoulders squared, gray hair slicked to perfection, his command coat pressed without a single wrinkle. He introduced the new generation of imported K-9 units, massive dogs with sleek coats, their handlers dressed in spotless uniforms. Each animal was worth nearly $100,000, Moss proclaimed, as if price could measure courage. Applause swelled. Flashbulbs cracked like artificial lightning. Jack stood near the back, Duke at his side, unnoticed in the shadow of spectacle. Duke watched the stage, tense but quiet, his fur catching reflections from the spotlights. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was working. Jack recognized the change in his posture, the stillness, the focus in the way the dog's chest tightened, almost like a held breath. A low, controlled bark slipped from him, barely audible under the noise. Then Duke surged forward, not with panic but precision. He bolted toward the stage, weaving between officers, vaulting past Moss's outstretched arm, and dropped low, belly pressed flat, tail stiff, body locked into the unmistakable signal for explosives. Some gasped, others laughed. Moss's voice cracked sharply through the microphone. "Get that washed-up mud off my stage." Jack's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He pushed forward, lungs burning from urgency. "Clear the stage, now!" His voice cracked open the air, raw and commanding. People froze. The crowd hesitated, expecting drama, not danger. Moss sneered, waving security closer. "It's pathetic. Get him out." A technician finally crouched to check the audio box beneath the podium. His fingers twitched the latch. Then his eyes widened, pupils pinched small from terror. Inside lay gray putty and a wired trigger. Real. Silent. Waiting. A scream cut through the hall. Panic swelled, bodies stumbling backward, chairs cracking against concrete, reporters dropping equipment. Moss staggered, face drained of color. Duke held his position, motionless, disciplined, waiting for an order that could save lives. Jack stepped beside him, voice steady, the same voice that once kept Duke from collapsing into fear. "Good alert. Hold." Duke didn't tremble, not once. People turned, first to Jack, then to Duke, then to Moss, who stood useless beneath blinding light. Cameras found him like predators. In desperation, he choked a sentence that shattered whatever was left of his dignity. No, he can't be better than Rex. He can't. The microphones dragged his words across the crowd like confession. He hadn't praised a hero. He had exposed his envy. Duke rose calmly when Jack signaled release. No. Cheers. Not yet. Just stunned silence. Thick, heavy, honest. A room full of people who had once looked away now watched with the awe owed to someone who had stood firm when others wavered. Duke walked beside Jack as they left the stage, not seeking applause, only following trust. And truth followed behind them, just as quiet, but undeniable. Morning light sat softly on the precinct steps, pale as quiet forgiveness. The building seemed smaller than Jack remembered, not weaker, just stripped bare of the noise that once pretended to be strength. Reporters no longer crowded the entrance. Excitement had turned into paperwork, statements, audit logs. The investigation came quietly, the way truth often arrives, not in fireworks, but in documents, signatures, voices sworn under oath. Captain Moss's office door stood open, his plaques already removed, his desk emptied into a plain cardboard box. He walked past Jack only once, unshaven, coat wrinkled, older than the man who had once chased applause. His eyes did not meet anyone's. Jack didn't hate him. He simply stepped aside, letting a man walk toward the consequences he had earned. The findings were simple, but heavy. Moss had imported expensive dogs for commissions disguised as training upgrades. He discarded Duke to protect the ghost of his old glory, not the team. No courtroom speech, no dramatic arrest, just quiet accountability, removal from duty, administrative charges, a career ending with paper instead of applause. Justice arrived not like thunder, but like rain on tired soil. Duke lay near Jack's feet during the announcement, head resting on his paws, unaware that his steadfast work had pulled truth into daylight. A few officers clapped, not loudly, not the kind that stirs pride. Instead, it was the kind that honors someone who stayed steady when others ran from their own shadows. Later, in a quieter room, Duke stood beside Jack as officers offered official recognition. No stage, no banners. Just a small plaque held out by the interim chief, a stern woman with weathered hands and a voice like gravel. Humble, sincere. Jack accepted it, but didn't lift it high. He placed it on a table near the floor, where Duke could see it, sniff it, ignore it if he wished. The dog nudged the corner gently, uninterested in titles, only in closeness. Jack lowered himself to both knees, arms wrapping around Duke's head the way one might cradle something fragile, yet stronger than steel. His voice softened into a whisper, meant for only 2 ears. "You were never discarded," he murmured, "just trusted to the wrong hands. Thank you for waiting, for letting me believe in you again." Duke leaned forward, licking his fingers with slow, deliberate affection. No medals, no speeches, just breathing, warm fur, shared quiet. Honor didn't belong to crowds. It belonged to those who never left when leaving was easy. Jack stood, Duke pressed close to his leg, not seeking recognition, only companionship. They walked out together into a day without applause, carrying something no ceremony could gift. The kind of loyalty that chooses you even when no one is looking. Sometimes, the world rewards the loudest voices and forgets the quiet ones, the ones who protect, endure, and stay loyal, even when no one is watching. Duke never asked for applause. He simply gave everything he had, again and again, even after being cast aside. And because of that, lives were saved. Let his story remind us. Honor isn't something you receive, it's something you live. Loyalty doesn't vanish when people fail to see it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a little faith in goodness today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to stay with our family of listeners. May your days be filled with courage, loyalty, and kindness that never walks away.